Hello and welcome to another episode of OnReviewCast. I'm your host here, Ash, and today we're going to be looking at something spectacular. You may have noticed my voice might change a little bit. Disregards, this is actually the way I actually talk, and I know it might be so actually surprising to you, but today we're going to be reviewing something really special, a really near and dear series to my heart. It's House of the Dragons, by popular demand, on review.
HBO series House of the Dragon Season 1 Episode 1.
So, yeah, guys, actually, no. I decided to change it up there. It might have news for a bit. I've decided to change my voice just a bit. I'm getting into the spirit of reviewing OnReviewCast. Welcome again. This is actually how I sound. How many of you guys were fooled? How many of you guys were not fooled? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, guys, yeah, we're reviewing House of the Dragons today, and I'm excited. This is a series, spin-off series, actually, from Game of Thrones. I don't know how much guys you out there have actually seen and or watched Game of Thrones, but if you haven't seen it, this going through this might be a little bit you know what? No, go ahead and watch Game of Thrones. That's the easiest way to go about explaining, I think, what we're gonna do here today. If you haven't seen Game of Thrones, watch Game of Thrones. I think we're gonna be spoiling little tidbits and referring to it a little bit here and there. But as I said, we're on House of Dragons on review. Yeah, so just like every other episode of House of the Dragons, we're gonna go through an episode breakdown courtesy of Fandom. And episode 1 is entitled The Heirs of the Dragon. The premiere date was August 21st and 2022. And yeah, synopsis courtesy of Fandom. Viserys hosts a tournament to celebrate the birth of his second child, and Rhaenyra welcomes her uncle Daemon back into the Red Keep. And yeah, the first episode, I think, this was off the cuff, just referring it back to Game of Thrones. Like, if you've seen Game of Thrones, I remember when this first came out, you've been waiting for this. Like, you've been waiting for this. You knew that, like, they're not just gonna let Game of Thrones just like die out like that. They're gonna do some kind of spinoff, something. Especially how people feel slighted and cheated about what happened to you know who, Mrs. Dragon, at the end of the Game of Thrones. Again, I already gave my spoiler warning, guys. Go ahead and watch Game of Thrones. It's a fantastic series. If you haven't seen it, go watch the entire Game of Thrones and then come back. It's awesome. Anyway, and right off the bat, like, first scenes you see that dragon, and like, who's with me? Like, you feel a breath of like dragons when this episode like kicks off. You're just like, the dragons, like, they're there. And this is on Review Cast. We've seen the entire series before in this particular. We've seen the entire season in this particular case of House of the Dragons. That becomes a reoccurring theme of like, oh yeah, they're dragons now. Like, the reason I say that, I think the people who have seen Game of Thrones will kind of like agree with me. Like, it's funny because like in the first episode, I think in the first early episodes of Game of Thrones, we talk about dragons and there's whisperings of dragons and how there's the most powerful beings and powerful things in this universe. And like, but we hardly ever see them. There was like the beginning early scenes with like Daenerys and how she had like her eggs and how she had like big plans for these eggs, and with Khal Drogo, and like that was the only inklings of early episodes of the dragons of what we have. But like, in the show being called House of the Dragons, it's all about the dragons, right? Like, it's all about the dragons. And when I first watched it, it was kind of like, okay, like, I'm not gonna lie, like, and who was with me, honestly, I was like, I'm not quite used to seeing these majestic beasts. these majestic beasts. I'm just like, every time it's like, dragon, I was like, oh man, that's so cool. But lest you think the show is all about dragons, it's definitely not. But yeah, it's this one's definitely a ride. I'm excited to be reviewing it. And yeah, so getting more into it, like we get a little bit of a backstory and setup for this this universe of exactly where we are. Where we have the Princess Rhaenyra and her King Viserys, so I described in the synopsis breakdown there. And at the current time, she has her mom who is pregnant with a baby that's coming that's supposed to be the next heir for the kingdom. And hopefully you guys will watch this episode as well. We know the situation, what happens there. But I found it, and first of all, like too, like before I even like really go in depth into like the whole world and the whole setup of these things. So the only, going back to Game of Thrones, and and guys again watch Game of Thrones. The only connection I guess we have to these Targaryens, because the way even the opening scene, we have Rhaenyra giving a narrative about how her father came to be in power because of the previous king, and his sister being up for the throne, and they went with Viserys being king. The only other connection we have to these Targaryen people, though, that we ever seen, like, and then they're so, I want to talk about that look real quick. They have like pale white hair, and they have these connections to basically the dragons in the world of Game of Thrones, and like they're so stand outish. And again, I know I'm contrasting it with Game of Thrones, but I think this is probably a good way to actually get into this, because the original material, the original source is Game of Thrones. And much like well, not quite like Interview with a Vampire, which we recently just did. This is a prequel spinoff to what we've seen happen in Game of Thrones. So everything that's happening, and we know this everything that's happening within this universe and this world is, post pre Lannisters, pre Baratheons, pre pre Starks, pre everything within that world. And it's just interesting to see that, I guess, the game is the game. I was like, what is that from? They said that shit in The Wire. The game's the game. Omar Little, rest in peace to that actor. He's a really good one. And yeah. But Omar Little, the game is the game. And it's the same thing here. I mean, like, honestly, the game is the game. It's so funny. Like, that's what it is. Even though this is a prequel, you even in the first episode, you kind of feel like, again, the game is the game. You have the king, Viserys, and you have the king's hand. And yeah, it's still the same, but only thing that's different is like these white-haired dragon controlling people are basically in charge. And I guess that's like, I know all the Khaleesi's out there, out there, they were probably waiting for this and championing this. But it's just the white hair and the control of the dragons and the status of the family. And like, guys, let me know in the comments, on social media, all this other stuff. Let me know if you agree. It's kind of like, it's a little whoa, right? It's a little whoa at first. I guess on the first couple of episodes, it's a little whoa, because again, going back to Game of Thrones, we don't really have a lot of, like, it's not really about the Targaryens. We don't really have a lot of connections to them and have a lot of knowledge about them. The only thing we really actually know and have connections about them is the Khaleesi, right? The Khaleesi. But they're very interesting, I'll say, and throughout the episode we'll discuss it a little bit more as to why they're so interesting. But they definitely are peculiar. There definitely are peculiar. I don't know if we should call them a race, but like a peculiar family group of people, I guess. I don't know. Like you really their house, yeah. I guess, yeah. Okay, yeah. The house is it's very peculiar. Because even in those early episodes of Game of Thrones, in which we saw, they were even in this, I just remember watching Game of Thrones. And when we were first introduced to Targaryens, when we first saw Khaleesi, right? The first thing we noticed, and I know I've been saying it a lot, but her white hair was like, again, like, whoa. But she wasn't the only one who had white hair. At the time, if you remember, when Khaleesi was actually introduced, she was brought in along with her brother, Aegon or whatever it is, I think, or whatever her brother was called, and he also had white hair, and her brother or whoever family member she was, but he also had white hair. He was basically trying to sell her off, which is kind of like fucked up. And I remember just this like this golden oil being poured on him and being burned to death. I remember that, but I also remember like Game of Thrones was a while for me, but like, yeah, but I also remember like the fact that one of their characteristics was like their fire didn't bother them. I mean, like, they're still human. Like, that guy died because the oil was put on him. He had a whole oil crown or whatever because he thought that he was supposed to be like a rightful king. And I remember Khal Drogo or someone like just dumping oil on him, and that's how he died. But one of their and you see this in Game of Thrones too. One of the characteristics is like they're supposed to be just dragon people. They're like dragons. Like, fire doesn't bother them. But again, yeah, through Game of Thrones, we don't really notice. We don't really notice that. Like, we don't really notice that these people are. They're not prevalent. That we don't really notice. They're not really as relevant in Game of Thrones. They're always like, and the only Targaryen we really know is Khaleesi, and she's like a part of the story, but she's like a fraction of the story as to what happens in it. But by the end of Game of Thrones, everybody is a Khaleesi, everybody is on Khaleesi's side, and everybody's like championing for her. And to this day, people still believe that she was robbed. Given the situation after what happened with her and Rob, but Rob, I get it. I didn't even mean to make that joke, but she was robbed. I did not like. She was robbed, quote unquote, air quotes. She was robbed. Yeah, she was. And he was Khaleesi. Yeah. Anyway, get back to it. Yeah, she so they both like I said, like, sorry, like it's weird to see how prevalent they are within the series. Like, the entire series, really, if you've seen it, is focused around the Targaryens and this how they were in power before. And there were always murmurings in Game of Thrones about like how, the Mad King, I think, was a Targaryen or something like that. I think I might have that wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys. But how he was the Mad King and how they used to be in charge, and because they had the power of the dragons. And then the thing is, in Game of Thrones, dragons are extinct, basically, all but extinct, until Khaleesi brings back a 3. And I think that's why seeing them so prevalent and about, and everybody just being so normal and cool with them, it's fucking weird. It's an odd thing to see. So yeah, just actually getting back to the episode, we find that her uncle, I think his name is Damon, comes back to actually I think, I don't know where he was before, but he comes back to the throne and he kind of like meets her. And if you've seen the series, the whole shenanigans we get into with Damon in the middle. It's the way we feel about him through beginning, middle, and end is a true roller coaster. if there was any, honestly. A true roller coaster of, is this guy, legit, or is he crazy? And even like in the episode, I said, but like we should have on first meeting him, it's kind of like, all right, like, that's the Rhaenyra's uncle, and it's like, okay, like it's cool. It's a little, he's a little odd, I think, off the first bat, but he might just be our uncle. We can't make any rash judgments about him quite yet, because we just met the motherfucker, right? Like we just met him. We don't know really too much about him, or what he's about, or what his goals are, his ambitions are, really. But we learned pretty fast with that whole Night's Watch incident. Man, that was I think that was like, honestly, like setting the tone of, basically, I think, the kind of guy he essentially is, or the kind of guy that he we get his first impression is that of, like, well, I mean, he's a warrior, kind of almost like commander in chief. He wants to, so he's some kind of ambition to be in charge and to be somewhat a leader, right? And that scene, if you could talk about that for a quick second, holy shit, man, that scene with the Night's Watch, and I think, I don't know why, I feel like that, and let me know if you guys like agree or not, but with the golden cloaks, as he calls them, I feel like that scene was it was very Game of Thrones, but I feel like they almost did it for the sheer shock value. Do you know what I mean? Like, they did it for the sheer shock value, to be like, we're just as brutal as Game of Thrones, if not more brutal. And we expect this kind of stuff from Game of Thrones, but this show is getting bullied real quick, real fast. It's like, I mean, and then at the end of the day, when you first see it, at least when I first saw it, I didn't really quite understand the context of what was happening. I just thought that, again, first impressions, right? I just thought that Daemon was a bully, and he was leading these army of bullies that was just like fucking up these random people or whatever it is. And it was fucking brutal, man. It was just brutal. It was going through the streets, chopping people's hands off, and I think they put a knife up a guy's butt or something like that. Jesus, it was pretty rough to watch, honestly, and it's just beating people through the streets, but the thing is, and that's the thing about first impressions, right? You don't really know until you know what the context of it really was. I mean, I don't know if the I don't quite know if the extent of which he went into by causing such mayhem and brutality was seriously justified. But what we understood was that the people that he was attacking, they were a bunch of murderers and thieves, and they were of the, apparently, not threats, but like just some dishonest people that were out and about in terms of like King's Landing. And I mean, from a moral perspective, we get that this story is taken from medieval times. Like, maybe they were justified, and maybe he was justified in actually doing that, because we don't really know. The king might have. We don't know if he would handle it this way, but the king might have. He might have handled it that exact same way, actually. Really, right? Because I mean, like, I think it was just because he wasn't really necessarily ordered by Daemon to do that. He just kind of did it, and the king's hand was kind of like making a fuss about how, hey, like, I mean, he was kind of like saying like, hey, like, you did this thing, this massacre without the king's, like, blessings, and X, Y, and Z. But at the same time, his defense was that like these people were a threat to his kingdom in the first place, right? Yeah, and I mean, think about it. If like you were a king and like these things were happening, and you would have to address them at some point, right? You would want to address them at some point. And I mean, like, probably he might have not chosen to do it that way. I think he was just a bit ambitious. And that's why I think in that particular instance, the king was too mad at him for essentially almost kind of sort of doing his job, I guess. But yeah. Yeah, so like it was that scene, it was brutal, and it was not sure if those actions were quite justified in what he did. I mean, yeah, they were a bunch of rule breakers and lawless people that they went after, but like, I mean, at the same time, like, I don't know, he didn't get blessings from the king, and this kind of that kind of shows his this kind of shows his defiance as a person, his characteristics as well. He's kind of a rogue. He's kind of like a loose cannon, like wild card. Wild card. Let me know if you guys got that reference. Man, anyway. But he's kind of the wild card of the I think they call it the court or what have you. And yeah. So I think, again, and going back to the overall perspective of this episode, I that scene was brutal. And Game of Thrones and a lot of these, HBO shows in general are known for being kind of in your face and kind of being a little bit over the top sometimes, and to get that shock out of you, I feel like, to a certain extent. But Game of Thrones especially, and because it's the one that, like, I think everybody's kind of like, it's a great show, the writing is amazing, but at the same time, it kind of goes forward with that embellishment of the whoa, like whoa. Another Game of Thrones characteristic is the installation of the horror house. I mean, like, again, they do their best to make to bring you into this world that you were once familiar with, now brought to like into another world of they do their best to make sure that to understand that, hey, this is still King's Landing. This is still the era of which you're in. You know what I mean? This is still where we still have whores about, and we still have lovers and orgies and all this other stuff, happening within this medieval time, basically. And speaking of medieval time, like we can't go this episode of OnReviewCast without talking about this jousting scene. First of all, wow, this is something, but this is also something very different from Game of Thrones that actually didn't happen much in Game of Thrones, that I was actually thinking about as to why it didn't really happen. We had the Sir Gregor, I'm pretty sure is his name in Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones, we had Sir Gregor fight off against that actor from, I forget his name, and forgive me guys, but the actor from Last of Us, actually, if you didn't know, that is that guy. We had him face off against him in a one-on-one battle, and that was the only kind of like combat, like one-on-one entertainment kind of battle that we kind of sort of really had, from what I can remember from the series. But back in the day, from what I remember in terms of medieval times, like they used to do that stuff like all the time just for entertainment and sport. Have these ridiculously, ridiculously dangerous stunts and fights and etc. just for kicks, for sick kicks back in the day. And I was kind of wondering, like, why they didn't really do any more, really why we didn't see much of that during Game of Thrones. And they definitely deliver on that here in House of the Dragons. So something that I think that is we probably won't see this much in, I don't know, maybe past this season, because it doesn't really say in the way that we've seen the story already, but the way that it seems like it's going, it doesn't necessarily seem like they would continue this. But we get to actually see, a Colosseum jousting match in this world of this time of before, the time of before of the of King's Landing. And it's actually pretty interesting, but it also reminds me of the fact that, human. This is so dumb. This is so dumb. Like, you can't, like, on the first watch when I first saw, you can't deny it. Like, you can't, come on. Like, you just gotta be honest. Like, someone's gotta like tell me, like, the truth, the actual truth. Like, you can't, like, lie. Like, jousting's kind of stupid, right? Like, the whole idea of jousting, and especially even like the way that they were doing it, with the different banners, and people come out and then you ride on these horses and you have this big ass long stick and you're supposed to run into one another. And I think, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure, like, I didn't catch it on the first go, but I just on the first go of watching it, I was kind of like, okay, like, I'm watching this and jousting's so dumb, but I'm just paying attention to the story and basically what's happening, like the connections between the characters and what basically apparently is the underlining story here. And we're gonna get into that a little bit later on too, is because there's a lot that's actually happening and the undertones of this. But what is concerning, and not concerning, but the first watch, like I was saying, what I was really focused on was like, jousting's so dumb. It's so fucking stupid. And it's only made more hilarious by the Prince Damon wearing the dragon with the fucking hat, with the dragon hat, and he's running around on his horse, and he's like picking out a opponent to basically go up against. It's so fucking silly. I don't think, like, and this is why I don't think that they would probably do this again, because while the production of this looks very much like Game of Thrones, if you've seen it, it looks very authentic. Everything looks like it's of that time, that medieval time. The Colosseum, obviously, from a production perspective, you can kind of sort of guess how they did this. This is with like CGI and etc. But the structure of the Colosseum, it doesn't look like a big ass like one circle Colosseum. The way that they shaped it, it actually looks like more of like what the Colosseums would be like back in the day, like not the traditional like commercial Colosseums, right? But like it's I just, again, like, I was on first watch, I was thinking, okay, like, this is so stupid. But like on the second watch, you get to see a few things that's it kind of sheds a little bit of light on not only the characteristics, but like the point of jousting, I guess, or the idea of jousting. I kind of sort of get it now. So during jousting, the thing is, what it was, because I didn't catch it before, I want to just mention it now. So the point is not to necessarily, because I used to think you just hit people on sticks and then they just like, whoever can hit them first, I guess, like, you win. But I think the point is to stay on the horse. Like, yeah, you both are going to get hit, but like, whoever can stay on the horse the longest, I guess, or whoever can be on the horse and still stay on the horse while after that initial hit, who could survive it, because if it is extremely dangerous with fucking horses, if you think about it. Like that, I don't know, that's one scene, the guy Damon actually tripped the guy with his joust, and like the horse fucking tripped. Jesus, poor horse. I wonder how they fucking shot that, by the way. Like, because that would look really realistic without horse fucking flipping over like that. Like, very, very authentic. I hope the horse is okay, and the guy too. Like, because I mean, but the horse looked like it was able to walk up afterwards. But like, you don't know, that could have been a stunt horse. A stunt horse. That could have been a stunt horse. That could have been just the stunt horse that actually fell or something like that. And I get out. We don't know how they did this, but still, that was actually really, really cool. But it actually shows two things: the versatility of the production side of things, but it also shows how much of a dick Damon can be when it comes to actually, the fighting. He doesn't actually necessarily also always play by the rules, because you're supposed to hit the other opponent's like shield and try to knock them off, like I was saying before. but instead he goes after the horse and he makes the horse trip, thus fucking up, the other guy. It's very, it's a stupid thing, but again, it was a stupid time. And I hate to relate this back to, the real world, but everything that's happening inside of the world right now, this is the time, back then, this is a time of war and like not much entertainment and not the internet. People just gotta find reasons to entertain themselves, like doing stupid, violent shit, right? Now it's not even like that much different. We still have crazy stuff happening now. But anyway, going back to the jousting and the whole scene of it. Like I said, it shows the kind of characteristic of which Damon is. And it also shows something you guys might have missed during the scene is that it shows the connection between Rhaenyra and I forget what her redheaded friend was named. Why am I forgetting? Why am I blanking on this? I can't remember her name, but anyway, it shows the connection. It shows the connection between Rhaenyra and her friend, and Allison. That's what her name was, and it shows that how closely. It shows how close they were, all the gossip and how they even like sit together and their relationship, and it actually also shows the certain family dynamics within the Targaryen household as well. So that was the whole point of the scene, and that also was to distract basically everybody from what was happening in the next scene, which we get to see. Which is basically Viserys' struggle with the birth. Viserys' wife's struggle with the birth of this child that's now being breached. Now, this particular bit of this particular bit of this episode was just very, wow. Again, I've never really had to deal with the certain situations, like the difficulties of making such hard decisions, because if you guys have watched the episode, you know that the baby is in breach and he has to make some kind of difficult choice between, saving the baby or saving the mother. Difficult, impossible choice. And while all this is happening, back at the Coliseum, people are, we see the raging and we see the violence that's actually breaks out, that's actually now broken out off the horses. It's just like how, in wrestling, again, like nothing's really changed with the human race and human beings, right? Just like in wrestling, we have wrestling when wrestlers wrestle. You go to WrestleMania, they keep it inside of the ring, right? Until some dumb motherfucker gets so mad and he just starts attacking people outside of the ring, and he just or a riot starts outside an actual fight that they're not being paid to fight. An actual fight starts in the crowd or something like that. It's absolutely ridiculous, and we see the cruelty and the devilishness, I guess that's a word, and hatred of men amongst one another, and it's truly disgusting. And the contrast, and if you think about it right now, the contrast of that is that they're trying to bring a child into this crazy fucked up world that what it was back then. And I'm not knocking anybody that wants to be a parent or that wants to be a parent or has dreams to be a parent. Some people dream to be a parent someday, but I don't know. I guess it kind of just makes you really think, right? I mean, and I guess it all depends on how you raise your kids and how you expose them to the world and stuff. But like, where I think the contrast within this particular material is kind of like that. There's life, and then there's death. There's cruelty. There's joy that can be brought into this world, but also cruelty. But overall, life is not painless. I think that's what it is, because we see with Sirius's wife going through something very, very, very traumatic, very, very painful, and we see in the Colosseum that they're causing pain for fun. It's not necessarily because they have to, or because of the situation, or the circumstances. The circumstances being that she's pregnant. She has to she is going through this pain because she's trying to bring life into this world, as to where they're going through this pain and death and suffering by choice. And there's something there. There's something definitely there. There's that contrast there as well. There's something there. Like, I mean, and I think there's something that speaks to life there, where we choose to go through pain as human beings for whatever reason. We sometimes choose that pain, and sometimes we choose the pain, and sometimes the pain just it naturally just comes to us. Sometimes we have a choice about it, and sometimes we don't have a choice about it, and that's life, honestly. And that's actually something beautiful right there. But getting back to the pregnancy and the difficulties that this lady's having with this baby. Oh man, I think that they did that scene because, well, sorry about that, guys. I think they did that scene because they were like, how we're like Game of Thrones? We're sort of like, we're just as bad as Game of Thrones, or we're just as good as Game of Thrones, and bringing you all that delicious, debauchery, all that delicious mayhem and crazy and chaos. You know how we bring the drama? Well, House of the Dragons is gonna bring the drama. That's what it's going to bring. It's going to bring the drama. It's exactly what it's going to bring, and everybody talks like an English accent, just like this. Anyway, listen. I just thought that scene when he made that decision to go forward with actually trying to save the child. Fucked up, right? Fucked up. Tell me it ain't fucked up though. Tell me it ain't fucked up though. That was so fucked, bro. Oh my goodness me. That was so fucked. Ooh, you guys, come on. Tell me in the comments that you agree with me or you don't agree with me. That was fucked. That was fucked up. I mean, the sheer fact that. Okay, here's how. Let's start from the production point of view. How it was fucked up. It was fucked up where they were to the point where it's kind of like, again, like, how for Game of Thrones, we're gonna turn it up to 11. The Game of Thrones was like a 10. We're going to 11. Like, let's push this. Let's show let's just show the absolute, like, in your face, cruelty of what women had to go through back in the day when it came to getting like C-sections and they wouldn't essentially like survive. Let's show that. Like, and that was I'm gonna admit to it, guys. I had to turn away a few times. I had to turn it away a few times, because the fact that she was kind of like, even at the beginning, she was like, no, I don't want this. She's like, no. She was like begging, like, no, don't do this. And they just like held it down because it was by order of the king. They just held it down, and they were just like, okay, here we go. We're doing this. We're ripping this out. And like, it was kind of like, it's kind of like, what it also reminded me of? It kind of reminded me of like when Carl from The Walking Dead had to, how Maggie had to cut out the baby, Judith, and then Carl had to kind of like take care of it, her body, to make sure that she wouldn't come back as a zombie. Like, that scene was pretty fucked. But like this was. But it was fucked because they didn't show it. We got the implication as to what was happening and what happened. But this was super fucked because they showed everything, dude. They did not held back. They showed them soaking sheets, soaked in blood, all this stuff. And it was rough. It was rough for me to watch. But also the authenticity of that, I gotta admit, makes the show amazing. I don't know, like that's what makes the show. It makes it amazing. That's the authenticity of that makes it pretty fucking, yeah. That's why it's so popular. That's why it's so good. So that's the production side of it, but the actual characteristic side of it, and in terms of the story, again, she was saying no, please, like don't. And I was just like, ugh, fuck, like I was like, oh fuck, just leave this woman alone. It's like, no, you don't want this. Like she should have a choice. And this is like, it just, oh, it was hard to watch. Really difficult scene. And meanwhile, in the background, we get to see how they keep switching back to scenes where Prince Damon is fighting against this the guy who Rhaenyra actually falls. Well, more spoilers, I guess. Well, one of the knights. I'll try to leave it as a spoiler less as I can for people who hasn't really seen this. But the in the background, he's fighting this guy who's he's fighting the guy who he was jousting, because he's now off the horse. And like I said, sometimes they get onto the ground and they decide to continue and fight the battle. And some of the people die while they're actually fighting. But the other guy's actually able to defeat him like respectably and honorably. And Damon's just using all these little tricks, these little swords and what have you, from compartments just to try to defeat him. But despite that, he still loses. And I think that is some super foreshadowing ahead in the future, and speaks to actually his character as well as the kind of ruthlessness that Prince Damon would actually go through to actually try to defeat any enemy that's in front of him. So they get this baby out. Back to the baby, yeah, I know. Yeah, I know, guys. They get this baby out, right? And yeah, so they get this baby out, and it seems like everything is fine and everything is okay. Well, like everything is fine and okay, except for the mother who died, who fucking is laid there in the bed with his blood-covered sheets. That's just. Again, I think they painted this picture. They did this just to show the actual gravity at which females had to undergo when it comes to not having modern day medical surgeries or modern day medical, applications to them when it comes to actually childbirth. And it's fucked up. Thank God for modern medicine. But the conclusion of it actually is that he not only lost, his wife, and he made to make that impossible decision. He not only lost his wife, but he also lost the baby as well. So the heir that he was looking forward to actually died after, due to complications after his birth. Because he thought that, like he got what he wanted. He lost his wife. That's very sad. But actually, it turns out like, no, he didn't get what he wanted. So he lost both of them. And from my perspective, that was kind of like, when I thought of that, I was kind of like, well, fuck. Like, I mean, as a male, and I know females, I know I'm going to catch some fire from this. But like, I'll just be honest and straight up with you guys. Like, I'll be vulnerable for a little bit. This is one of my greatest fears, honestly, as a male. And I think as the toughest man would probably tell you, if he's a real man, he'd be straight up with you. He'd be like, listen, that's probably one of the fucking most difficult things a man could go through. Yes, ladies, we understand that, I gotta carry the baby, going through me, all that sort of stuff. There's noise from them, and yeah, we understand that. But you gotta understand, like, we have to carry the weight of understanding that we put you in this predicament, and when in the efforts of trying to build something, and like in the efforts of trying to build something, you lose everything. Like, you know what I mean? It's like rolling some dice is like, or being is like gambling. Like, it's a gamble, and like him, he took a gamble and he lost. But like that's the worst. That's one of a man's worst nightmare, is that like you have this beautiful woman, you are happy with her, you're trying to build a family, you have the money and the financial stability to build this family, you rich, you the king, right? And then just because, you know, complications of the medicine ain't there, and just something happens, fate, be it God willing or whatever have you, they both end up dead. That's fucked, man. That's fucked. That's the only way you could have said. And that speaks to me. And again, like I said, like that's like one of my worst fears, because you're happy with this woman and she be making you happy, and you just trying to make her more happy by expanding your family and giving your relationship some love and etc. And you end up losing it all. You end up essentially you feel like you're murdered. You feel like you killed her. You feel like you feel like you feel like, because that guilt of like, well, if you had not done that, you know what I mean? Like, and in most cases, I'm not saying like it's anybody's fault. It's not anybody's fault. But like, I could just imagine the weight of that, feeling that is just very, that would just be, you know, because you would always think that like, what if you had just, I don't know, maybe waited another year, or I don't know, done something more differently. And in his case, definitely, if he just made the right choice, well, no, there's no right choice. If he just, well, in his case, yeah, kind of the king's choice was kind of like, I don't know if there was a right choice. If he just had a conversation, he didn't even ask her. That was the kind of fucked up thing about it. He didn't even ask her. He didn't have a conversation about it. He just like, okay, yeah, I'm making this decision for you. I want my child, right? He should have just like have a conversation with his wife. Like, yeah, she in pain. She might be in hysterical or whatever it is, but still sit her down and be like, all right, listen, this is the point of where we at or whatever. I really didn't like that. I thought it was kind of fucked. That was another point that was kind of fucked up about that. Like, why didn't he be like, yo, listen, baby, like, listen, this is where we at. This is the situation. And I mean, I don't know what to do. So I thought that's why I got to talk to you. Because he don't know what the fuck to do. I'm pretty sure if he saw that outcome, he wouldn't have fucking made that choice. And the funny thing is, that choice sets every fucking thing off. If you know the entire season. If you know the entire season, you know everything that basically happens within the season. That sets everything off. Yeah. And anyway, that sets everything off in a chaotic spiral. And it's funny because that might have been avoided if you think about it. Or it might have went the same way. But I just think it's fucked up that he didn't have a conversation with his wife. That was fucked. Anyway, yeah, and getting back into the story, right after this fucking thing happens, they jump into, oh, well, we have a problem. You don't have an heir. And I think it was like the same day that they had to have this King's Council. The motherfucker didn't even take the time to like arrest him. Like, he should have. Could have gave him get a little bit of time to get his bearings and not make him freak out so much. But like I said, like that just sets everything off in motion for everything that's supposed to be basically set up. So now he's more tense, and I think as a king, as a ruler, he's not really thinking clearly, and his decisions and his actions aren't really aren't going to be his focus, because he basically just lost everything today. So he's in a bit of a state of not shock, but like, I don't think that he should be having meetings with his council for the good of the realm. Like right now, he's not any good to the realm in that fragile, messed up state that I can only think of that he's going through right now. He shouldn't be anywhere near this council or these people, but he is. And after that meeting happens, Alicent, Rhaenyra's very close friend, has a conversation with her father, who is the Hand of the King. And this was kind of all kind of fucked up. I think, again, like, I feel like this episode was just dedicated to going above and beyond what Game of Thrones is all about. This motherfucker decides to take things to the next level in pimping out his daughter for king's power, essentially pimping out his daughter to gain favor and power with the king. And the way he does it is so subtle and slimy. He's kind of like, oh, I was thinking that you can go ahead and visit the king. And then even she's like, well, what the fuck? Like, in his chambers? That's kind of inappropriate, right? Like, she's like, in his chambers, really? In his chambers? And he's like, yes. And he's like, I think you should wear something, wear something of your mother's. You should probably wear something of your mother's. And then that's when you knew that subtle, like, wear a dress of your mother's or something like that. I think that was the line. And that's when you knew it was like, this fucking dirty. Like, he's being all seeming shit. Like, he's trying to get her to fuck the king. Like, this is motherfucking dirty. Like, it's oh my god. Again, they're crossing some lines here. They're just trying to show how big and bad they are off the cuff with the pilot. This is the pilot. Off the cuff with the pilot. And shit, honestly, it's working. Like, it's working. So she goes to see the king for the first time, and she talks about how she lost her mother, and it reminded her of basically everything that happened. And she brings him a book and etc. And again, even all of this was just set up by her father. Like, he planted that seed of thinking like, oh, this time of losing Rhaenyra, because she had first come to him being like, Rhaenyra lost her mom, but like, and he was kind of like, oh, I know, it reminds me of your own mother, how I lost her and all this other stuff. And like, he planted that seed into her head, and she then in turn shared that with the king, which then we know, later on basically what happens. But that connection, that's how exactly that connection was essentially forged. Yeah. And like I said before, I think this is a love letter to Game of Thrones, essentially. This is again love letter to the original source material of Game of Thrones. Song of Ice and Fire for the books. Yeah, I know. It's just basically saying that this series is going to be way more fuckier than Game of Thrones. Or we're going to rise, we're going to go above and beyond to Game of Thrones. So in the next couple of scenes, we see Daemon talking with the king about the issue with what he said in the whorehouse, how his son was heir to the throne for a day. I didn't really see the problem with like, I didn't really see the problem with that. I didn't really see the problem with like, I didn't really see the problem, the issue with why, I didn't really see the problem or the issue with why he got so upset with that. I mean, I guess Daemon, it was implied to him through the king's hand. The king's hands doesn't really like Daemon anyway, but I guess it was implied that he was kind of like mocking the unborn child. Well, no, he was born, but like he died shortly after. So he was kind of mocking him, I guess, in a way, when I don't think that's really what he was doing, because we heard the speech, he was just kind of like, he did say something about him, that child being an heir for the day, but I don't think, it didn't really come off as like disrespectful, you know? So this is why I'm saying like the way how we feel about Damon is kind of like up and down. Up and down. It's kind of like wavy. It's like, is he a good guy? Not a good guy? Is he a dick? Not a dick? Like, is he just passionate about protecting his family? It's wavy. It's wavy. But like, I mean, I like to believe that in my eyes, maybe I'm too maybe passive or something. I don't know. I didn't really see a problem or a disrespect towards it. But again, this motherfucker really ain't thinking clearly, right? This dude who just lost everything, like I said before, he's not thinking quite clearly. He's not thinking the way proper, like, his head isn't on straight. Is the way that a emotionally stable king should probably be thinking. But I mean, really, like, I can't blame him. We can't really blame him. Again, this world is destroyed. It's done. Yeah, so he banishes Damon to go back to his lady wife. That whole thing. Why did I fucking call them lady wives? This is a wife, man. Like that was the sign of the times, though. But he banishes from King's Landing and tell him to go back to the Vale or something like that to with his lady wife. And we see him get cut by the throne. Now, something I want to touch on it real quick. The next scene, and before that next scene, something that happens. He's sitting in the Iron Throne, and he gets cut. And previously, they were saying or talking about how he got cut, and he is kind of like infected with this thing or something like that. And they lay hints to it, and we know the story. We know exactly what's going on with that. But the thing is, the lesions on him or whatever, the cuts or whatever it is that may have you, on the first watch, you don't really know what the fuck's going on with that. But you kind of get some suspicions as to like, this motherfucker is, someone's poisoning him actually. Because everything we saw with Joffrey in Game of Thrones, I was kind of like, I wouldn't be surprised if someone was kind of coming after him. He doesn't seem necessarily like a horrible king like Joffrey was. He doesn't necessarily seem particularly wicked, but you know, it's the Game of Thrones. Game is a game, baby. Game is a game. There are always motherfuckers coming after people, you know, for the throne. There's always someone who's gonna want the throne. We know the game. I wonder if someone is actually poisoning him, to making him have these lesions, and then he gets cut on the throne before the next scene starts. And it made me think that, like, what if, like, the chair, because the chair, if you've seen the Iron Throne, guys, I'm pretty sure at some point everybody's like seen this seat. It's a Game of Thrones. Yeah, everybody's seen this seat. It's made of iron. It's just straight up a bunch of metal fucking swords in a room made into a chair. And like, I wonder if like that is what is making him sick. And not only that, I wonder if the act, because we've seen this, if you've seen the show Game of Thrones, everybody who goes after that crown or who sits in that seat for some reason for a certain amount of time, they fucking go crazy, right? Or it's just, I think it's just like, might be a combination of power. But what if it wasn't just power? What if it was like that metal or that particular metal, they were getting like mercury poisoning or iron poisoning or something like that. It was just because they were just exposed to this metal for such an extra long time, that it started to send them crazy and started to make them make these choices that were like absolutely ridiculous. And it gets them sick. And it does certain particular things to whoever's sitting in the throne. Really. And I mean, the people who want the throne, who sits around the throne, who's at the throne, it makes them crazy for them to want it. But the person who's actually sitting in it, I can't really necessarily say we've met a king that wasn't really like, you know, we've questioned his judgments or questioned the things that he's done. Or even or maybe if like the good kings are the kings who could control this shit, who got this shit under control, and they get sick. And then the rulers who are just crazy, it makes them even more manic. I don't know. But it was just a weird little thought that I had. That the chair itself is playing some kind of role, or someone was setting them up. Maybe they poisoned the chair. They put edging in the chair to just cut him slightly and put some poison in his blood or something like that, and it might turn out to be that that's the case. Again, this series is a while ago for me too. I don't really remember every detail about it. That might actually be the case, but it was just something that I was thinking about. Anyway, let's get into the next scene of talking about when Rhaenyra and Viserys is talking. So Rhaenyra's talking to her father, and he is trying to get her to understand that realistically what it means to be a Targaryen. And I think that this scene was actually really significant because I think it foretold the future of basically Game of Thrones. It basically talked about the ending of the Game of Thrones, and I thought that was actually pretty cool. I didn't catch it around the first time because I think Game of Thrones was in between a lot of things that I was viewing at the time, and I didn't really catch his dialogue. And let me know, guys, in the comments if you actually agree with me. Sometimes, like, the dialogue within Game of Thrones is kind of in Game of Thrones, it's kind of hard to understand like what is going on. I guess for me, because of all the visual things that's actually happening in the actual show, but also sometimes because the speech is a little weird, and the way that they talk is absolutely ridiculous. Sometimes it's just a little. Well, it's just a little hard to understand to keep up sometimes with all the different names too, I think. But on the second watch, I kind of think I got it a little bit more. He was trying to basically explain to her that I'm going to name you as the heir, then my next heir. But there's a secret you have to know, and the secret was basically that, that these powerful, fucking, uncontrollable wild beasts of dragons are just dragons, and we just fucking people. That's the illusion. The illusion is just like everybody think we are in control of the dragons because now we're special and we have this magnificent hold over these dragons. When in reality we're just peace. They're more powerful than we are. And like, you think about it, that's the truth. You're not gonna go fucking, like, you see motherfuckers before, you've seen it like somewhere on TV or something like that. Motherfuckers like ride on wheels and like ride on cheetahs and tigers and shit. Like, no, motherfucker, no, the motherfuckers allow you to do that because like any like killer whale or like tiger or whatever it is that you're riding, or even a horse, they're wild animals, baby. They're a beast. That thing doesn't want you on it. It'd be like, no, get the fuck off me, and it'll try to eat you or like attack you in some kind of way. And that's like the reality in the sense that he was trying to bring to her, and the prediction that he was making about the Song of Ice and Fire, and how he was kind of like the world will be taken over by ice and a winter that would be so cold. And all know from Game of Thrones that we have like, oh, the winter is coming. That's the most famous line, right? From Game of Thrones. And we actually saw at the end of Game of Thrones, winter did come, and we had that whole big fight. And that's the fight that he was talking about. And that's the prediction essentially that he was talking about. And I thought that was kind of cool because, like, first of all, the dream of the future was correct. So apparently Targaryens have some kind of ability to see or foresee the future, which is absolutely incredible, first of all. And then second of all, it ties it strongly back to the actual source material of Game of Thrones. The next couple of scenes is just honestly the different houses, or actually no, while he is exploring, while he is explaining how they're just people, we get cuts and scenes of Daemon flying off with his prostitute lover, actually, not back to the Vale, but I think somewhere else, but they fly off together. and he tries to get her to bond with his with a dragon. I'm not sure if it's his dragon, but with a dragon, essentially. And it further solidifies with Viserys was saying, like, we're just people, and like these dragons are like beasts. We have a connection to them, but we formed that over the years. It's not necessarily our birthright. You know what I mean? Yeah, and then it also cuts to the different houses of the different houses or respective houses pledging fealty or pledging the loyalty to see Rhaenyra as the next heir to our ruler. And the reason that she wasn't picked before was because she was like, she's a girl, which is fucking stupid, honestly. Because all of his, again, it's so funny, all this could have been avoided if he had just been like, she's my heir, and she's just like, if he just like ignored the fact that he had to like feel like he had to like live up to these traditions and listen to what these people saying, and if he just named her heir earlier, I feel like perhaps a lot could have been avoided. Yeah, so we just go through the scene of where the Stark, and yeah, that's actually was pretty cool too. You get to see the Starks pledge loyalty, all the Game of Thrones houses that we are familiar with, the Starks, the Baratheons, the Starks. We get to see the Starks, the Baratheons. I don't think they mentioned the Lannisters, but definitely the Starks and the Baratheons, and I think there was one more, but I'm not necessarily remembering it right now. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So that essentially wraps up the episode where her loyalty is being essentially being pledged to her. So now this time we're gonna talk about Ash's favorite scenes. This is a segment where I talk about my top favorite scenes within the episode. And first scene we're definitely gonna start off with, I think, is I think one of my favorite scenes. Just gonna check something real quick. Yep. One of my favorite scenes, I think within this, the brutality, despite the brutality of it all, was Daemon's first scene when he walks into the army with his when he walks into the city with his army. I think that was pretty good because it kicked it off in a way where it set the standards of like, hey, this is Game of Thrones, this is what we're all about. We're about armies, medieval times, etc., etc. This is where we're at, and this is where we're looking at in terms of production quality and everything. It set the tone of how horrible we remember how horrible this world can be. I thought that was actually pretty cool in terms of like reminding us of what kind of like, you know, like I said, like the world is actually in. Second favorite scene is going to be the jousting scene. That I like that because that was so different from, like I said, from actual Game of Thrones. When you think of medieval times, you think of like jousting and knights and etc. And we get knights and etc. in Game of Thrones, but we never got like the jousting. Like I said, like this is a new concept, a new thing that they tried, and jousting is stupid overall. It really is. But I liked how they tried something new. It kind of sort of worked, and I think it worked for me more on the second watch than it did on the first, because I actually kind of understood what the point of it actually was. So yeah, I think definitely that's like one of my favorite scenes as well. And lastly, the last favorite scene has got to be, I think, the conversation with Viserys and Rhaenyra, how he basically explained to her that like we're just people, and these beasts are something that we weren't necessarily supposed to have control over, but we do. And you know, him just being open with her and being honest with her, and the cuts to the different families that the different families that we're all familiar with, pledging fealty and pledging loyalty to the House of the House of Targaryen, and pledging fealty and loyalty to seeing her as the next heir. I also think that this is kind of cool because like that was significant. It's kind of like what was happening in Game of Thrones, because when the dragons were extinct and the Targaryens were no longer in power, every mofo and all those families that they mentioned wanted to be king, wanted to be head at one point. You know, the Starks, the Baratheons were did have the claim to the throne. I think the Robert Baratheon was the first king. Despite all of that, despite all of that, there was a moment in Game of Thrones, and I can't remember exactly when it was, which season it was, but there was a moment in Game of Thrones where they were kind of like considering Daenerys Targaryen to be, or acknowledging Daenerys Targaryen to be actually the ruler of the Seven Kingdoms. And it kind of also puts into question what Robb did to her in the end of the series. Is like, was that really the right choice? But this bitch is going crazy, so I don't know. All right. It's time for another segment of OnReviewCast. Linda, let's get the on-review score.
House of the Dragon Episode 1 receives a 4 out of 5.
Well, anyway, guys, thanks so much for listening. That's going to do it for me. Definitely out of time here. Remember to follow and like all of us. Remember to follow and like us on our socials, our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Interact with us, guys. Let us know what you think. And you know, it really is something, you know, special when we get a chance to actually review these things and help the channel grow, help us to keep rocking here on OnReviewCast. We appreciate anything that you're able to do for us. If it's a like, cool. If it's a subscribe, cooler. If it's anything on Patreon, which we do have, even cooler. Yeah. But yeah. And lastly, guys, don't forget, be safe, be kind, be you. Take care.